Hello and welcome to another episode of Energy Insights. Today I'm fascinated to have a very special guest with me in the studio. Aditi has had a fantastic, vibrant career in energy. Aditi, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Aditi Tulpule. I'm a director of strategy, risk and compliance at a company called Synergy, and we essentially deploy smart grid technology. So we're market innovators. And by background, I'm a lawyer by training for my sins, but also kind of worked with Ofgem in-house, advising the licensing and enforcement function back in 2015, and then most recently with Elexon, advising on key market modifications and pushing through key changes, which also actually interestingly included the split of national grid between transmission and system owner, and now we're seeing them move to NetSo. So yes, that's essentially my background in a nutshell. I typically advise on market innovation solutions, route to market. I also have some background in heat, so it's a bit of a hot pot.
Well, what a time to be in energy markets and all of that experience and the transition to net zero, perfect storm.
Yeah, it does. It does definitely feel like that. It feels like you're pretty much in the throes of things here now. And what an exciting time to be a lawyer in the energy industry. Absolutely true.
So, Aditi, with your experience of Elexon, what we would really love to learn from you is what is Elexon's role in the energy system? And the energy system has gone through many evolutions. So maybe let's start with what has the role been, and maybe we'll fast forward into what the role should look like in the future.
Sure. I mean, Elexon is what is commonly referred to in industry a code manager. Or a code administrator, and there's debate on what word to use. But essentially, they're the keepers of the balancing and settlement code, which is one of the key codes of the electricity industry. And it allows for contracts between generators, and there are other bodies, but primarily generators and suppliers, to be settled on a commercial basis. And the reason this is important and such a critical role is because electricity can't be stored, as most people are aware, or not quite as well as gas. So yes, there are of course storage solutions, but they're not quite mainframe yet, which means it's got to be balanced on a second-to-second basis. And you've got to balance the system constantly, which means you can only ever have predictions about how much you're going to generate or how much you're going to supply at any given point in the future. And what needs to happen is you need to look at those positions that each party said they were going to take in a contract and look at what actually happened in a given half hour, because that's the settlement period for this country. So Elexon plays a really important role. It looks at who did what, who said what, and what the delta is, and who should be paying. So that was primarily the traditional role of Elexon, which they obviously played really, really well. But increasingly, you're seeing them take on more and more responsibility for actually facilitating markets and flex markets. And that's a whole story we can unpack to the rest of this interview. But suffice to say that they're very much at the center of building a bridge between the past and the future.
Excellent. And that accounting is so important, right? To identify who promised what they would deliver but didn't deliver,
Yes.
therefore bears the cost of the imbalance as well.
Exactly right.
So talk to us a little bit about the complexity of the balancing settlement code. It must have existed for decades now.
2000, I think, is when it came into play, and I hope I'm getting my year right, but it is 2000 as far as I remember. And yeah, it's a contract essentially, which every electricity supplier, distributor, generator, anybody really that has either a license or is a qualified person is required to sign up to. So it's the one place where these different parties within the industry actually come together to talk about what their rights and obligations are vis-a-vis each other. So the suppliers versus the distribution network operators, the distribution network operators versus the transmission network company, all of these people versus the system operator, and all of those people versus all those metering qualified people that provide metering assets or operate them. So it's a big contract and therefore complex.
How many pages are we looking at?
Last count, I think about 800 if you include the the secondary or subsidiary documents. Yeah.
And how has the contract changed over time? The market's changing, it's rapidly changing now. How is the balancing settlement code keeping pace with that?
Well, that's just the beauty of this Bible, as I like to call it, of the industry, is because it really does try to keep in step with all of these amazing changes that the industry is seeing. So in many ways, it's your ideal contract because it's actually keeping in step with the changes that are happening, and in many ways actually front-running them as it needs to, because without kind of including it in that Bible, you can't actually do things. So in many ways, their kind of position puts them at the front end of the market rather than at the back end trying to play catch up. But it really is a live document from my perspective. It's one of those things that is never complete because there's always change going through. And it's a very interesting document in itself because in some ways it creates credibility for market participants by locking down certain positions, which mean that the consumers like you and I don't have to worry about what if my supplier doesn't supply me with electricity, because I know I'm already taken care of through the regulator, through the codes. My position is hedged as a consumer. So it's really an extension of kind of clamping down on certain key obligations that each party has to absolutely comply with. But then it also has this additional role of actually facilitating that, making it more efficient, making it more future-facing, and carrying out those changes that actually mean that in the changing energy industry, where you've got now more generators that are actually connected at distribution level rather than the transmission level, actually have access to markets, actually don't have to add on burdensome costs, which they then have to push to the consumers to just be able to survive on a commercial basis. So it's a lot of things that it tries to cater to. So it's a very live document.
That's phenomenal that it's changed and in actually many ways leading the transition for the market. Talk to us about some of the key changes that you've overseen in your time at Elexon.
Absolutely. So look, I think the biggest change that probably I would say is absolutely critical in the last sort of 10 or 20 years in terms of changes to the code has been the introduction of the wider market participation. So which was referred to as Project Air before the European Union kind of situation happened. But before that, but essentially what it tries to do is it allows the creation of a body that's not a supplier to actually access the balancing mechanism. Now, why is this important or relevant? The balancing mechanism is where the electricity system operator takes actions to correct the grid. So where, for example, the anticipated position was that a generator would kind of pump out 100 megawatts of electricity within a given half hour, say, and the supplier said, yeah, they'd take that 100. And it turned out actually that the generator couldn't pump out 100, and the supplier actually needed that 100. So what happens to, say they only managed to pump out 80, so what happens to the balance 20? And I'm making this super simple, really, but that is essentially what it is. It's taking all these positions between individual contracts and seeing where the positions should have been, where they actually are, and what needs to happen. So do we need to buy more electricity that doesn't exist, or are we trying to sell off electricity that we didn't use? Because at the end of the day, the grid has to be balanced. So they then take actions to say, right, okay, we're short on 20 megawatts. Who's got 20 megawatts available in the market? And there are generators that are actually available to deploy that service, and they act just to do that. So they're called peaking plants, for example. So that's what they look at. And when they do those things, it obviously it comes at a premium. So the price for that electricity per sort of megawatt hour is not going to be the same as it would have been had it been bought, with foresight. So that then actually attracts a fair amount of price. So to give you an example, where and these are obviously higher costs as well, but in the wholesale market, where a megawatt hour of electricity would typically sell for 180, 200 pounds per megawatt hour, in the balancing market, in the balancing mechanism, it could go up to 2,700. Yeah, so it's a very, a potent market, and there are people.
It sounds like a luxury goods market almost for the same price.
But it is. I mean, energy is a luxury. Actually, if you don't get it right, there's a price. There's a huge price to pay if you have a blackout. So it is a luxury market. Naturally, this is why it's really important that Elexon works really closely with the electricity system operator to actually hedge that market properly. And one of the actions they took was to actually broaden the market participation, so you don't have fewer people bidding for that, to supply that 20 megawatt hours of electricity, because obviously lower the competition, higher the price. So the first action they took quite logically was to widen that market and get entities that weren't traditional suppliers to actually engage in the balancing mechanism, which really was groundbreaking and continues to remain groundbreaking. And they've only built on that since then. So it's an exciting time, really, and that's one of the key changes. The second key change, which I actually was fortunate enough to be involved in and actually leading on behalf of Elexon when I was there, was the P375 change, which then took the story forward and said, right, so we've got all these people that can now participate in this key market. Let's look at what assets they can utilize to actually go into that market. Now, when you look at suppliers, their story starts and ends with boundary point meters. They can't go behind that. But they thought, actually, this new entity, this can possibly go behind that. So you've now got assets that are actually not connected to a boundary point, or say connected to the grid but not at the boundary point, that can now participate through the VLP in the balancing mechanism.
So VLP here being the virtual lead
The virtual
party.
lead party, exactly. That's that entity that's like a virtual supplier, effectively. I don't want to be making up new terms here, but yeah, essentially that's the role. And actually, they've gone even further now, and they've now allowed VLPs through P415, I believe, access into the wholesale markets. So you've now got an entity which looks and acts like a supplier purely for market access. I mean, how brilliant is that?
It's breaking the monopoly.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And that's exactly what needs to be happening. There's a democratization of the market. I mean, suppliers have a huge role to play. Don't get me wrong. We've got a supplier hub model in GB, and it's critical that suppliers are given the due respect for the efforts they take to keep it all together. But could the market benefit from an alternative? Absolutely, yes. That was sussed and that was addressed. And there's only, you can do so much now going forwards. That was the enabling part of the change. Now that we've got that big ticket item correct, I think there's a lot that can then happen as a kind of fallout of that, if you like. So yeah, there's only one way forward.
Aditi, I'm fascinated by the new role, the new organization that you're working in, and you're really taking what VLP was going to deliver 2 notches up, right, with local grids.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, look, there's a huge amount of demand generation that the ESO can't see. And by ESO, I mean the NESO now. Yes, the electricity system
we
operator.
just didn't have enough acronyms in the system now, so let's introduce one more.
Never enough. Yeah. I mean, we can talk till kingdom come about acronyms in this industry. But really, I mean, the electricity system operator can't see. So in order to balance something, you have to be able to see both sides. And if you can't see either side, it's really hard to balance. So what they're trying to do is essentially bring all of that generation and demand to the fore, so that the electricity system operator can actually see what's going on to the best of its abilities. Now, it's really difficult to do that at the minute because a large part of the demand is made up through the residential users or domestic consumers, as we call them. Now, one aspect of that is market-wide half-hourly settlement. But actually, although it will make it more transparent, it's not necessarily resolving the cost crisis that consumers are facing on energy costs at the minute. So what could we really do to fix this? And that's where my company comes in. Because we took a step back and we thought, actually, you know what? I think the solution to this is actually putting generation close to the point of demand. We call it place-based power, which means your power comes from the generator that's either located on your rooftop or your neighbor's rooftop, or a battery that's communal.
So just taking away the congestion challenges that we have today.
Exactly right. So this helps on so many fronts. It helps the developers trying to build out these schemes that are currently having to wait for 4, 5, 10 years for a capacity connection that's suitable. It helps consumers because it puts them more in control of their energy usage, and it actually almost leapfrogs evolution in the industry by actually involving customers a little bit earlier into the flex space, where consumers can decide to sort of not run some of their gadgets, something like a washing machine or a dishwasher, or not charge their car during the peak hours. Imagine if 1,200 homes are doing that cumulatively, you're actually displacing demand during peak periods, helping everybody actually save cost. So it's a no-brainer, really. And my company actually funds these solutions. So, it's not a cost to consumers or developers, actually, because, turn out to be the last mile supplier, and that's how we recoup our costs. But mind you, the regulation doesn't allow us to charge anything more than what consumers would otherwise pay for. So, and it's not just my company. This is something that a lot of our competitors in this space are also looking to do. And I think that's the right way forward, because yes, you want transparency in the market, but you also want the consumers to not have to pay through their noses for infrastructure they're not really using. So it's about doing what the grid's trying to do at the national level at a more local level.
Sure.
And really, national is a collection of locals. So if we do a good job locally, there'll be less to do nationally, which then means the balancing mechanism will probably have a lot less to do and a lot less money to be spent in that market, hopefully, over a period of time. So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Indeed, and the balancing settlement code has gone through its evolutions.
Yeah.
Some big ticket items you
Yes.
talked about there,
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Is regulatory challenge still a challenge, holding back the big evolutions or the big, sort of review of massive changes within the BSE?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can't say no to that question. The answer has to be yes. But the reality of the situation is the BSE, as I keep saying, is it's a very important element, but it's one element of the space. You've got the distribution user system agreement, you've got the grid code, you've got the you've got the distribution code, you've got the CUSC, which is the connection user system codes. There's so many, smart energy code. I mean, I could keep talking, but the point is there's so many codes, and all of them have a very important role to play in the mix. So yes, of course, the BSE is absolutely critical from a commercial and markets perspective, but from a physical infrastructure perspective, you've got other codes, and they all have to talk to each other, and everything has to work together to actually enjoy the benefits of a system where I know that when I turn that switch on, my power is going to turn on. And that's really important. And I have to know that that power is clean as far as possible, and I have to know that I'm not paying through my nose for that power. So there's so many elements. It's an energy trilemma. Long story short, is regulation, could we be doing more? Absolutely yes. Are we doing more? Yes. Could we do better? Yes. Is this fast enough? No. So yes. So look, I mean, as a takeaway, there really does need to be more could be done from a policy perspective to start looking at things in the round. The energy industry has been quite siloed, and it's worked well with that silo for a while, but it's changed now. The ground realities have changed. You've got more generation and demand connected at the last mile than you've ever had before. It's no longer a unidirectional grid, it's a bidirectional grid. And it's not just a bidirectional grid, it's a consumer-orientated grid where you've got a prosumer now. The concept of a consumer is really passé. So things are going really quickly, and you no longer have a situation where you've got a generator and you've got a consumer. The consumer is the generator. So then how do you build a system of regulation, of trust, of credibility with these various players that all have got to do their part without burdening the consumer with a wad of contracts that thick, right, to go through? And that's really where digitization comes in. I think that absolutely has to be the answer going forward. Everything, I think, now depends on the availability of good quality real-time data, transparency around that data, and essentially the ability of that data to make those connections and join those points that we haven't been able to join so far because the system's been fairly manual. So it's bringing a grid that was constructed in the 1800s into the 2030s. How are we going to do that? And I think it's technology that holds the key to this. So regulation, I think, is very much going to be driven by technology rather than anything else going forwards. So yes, it's about us, all of us in the industry, keeping an open mind so we can allow for those technology bridges to connect us without kind of taking the usual approach of, oh, I'm not sure I want to do this.
The technology frontier is really, really exciting. But at the same time, the frontier is being changed every day with more disruptive technologies coming into the mix, also bringing their own challenges and risks, right? And so the compliance, the technology, the unknown risks, it's a lot to synchronize together.
Absolutely. I mean, I love this sentence that used to be spoken about in Elexon. I've never forgotten it. And it said, technology can be a commercial solution. It cannot be a regulatory solution, because regulation actually relies on trust. And for trust to be built, you need to have rules. So can you do away with rules? No. but could the rules enable and fold technology in to actually give them the gravitas, the strength, and the speed they need to perform at? Absolutely, yes. So, I don't see this as kind of the opposing factions, really. I think regulation and technology have to go hand in hand. And who knows, maybe we'll see more technology in regulation. Wait and watch,
Fingers
right?
crossed.
Fingers crossed, exactly right.
So Aditi, Elexon has done a brilliant job in
Yes.
bringing market transparency to the
Yeah.
front, right? I remember back in the day, BMRS used to be the solution that would push, well, rather
Data.
us grabbing data off
Yeah.
of the platform, and now we've got the Elexon Connect platform, and
Fantastic, yeah.
almost real time provides that data and that transparency. Talk to us a little bit about how is that transparency pivotal for bringing more meaningful operations within the industry, but also breaking the monopoly to a large extent?
Absolutely. Look, I mean, when you talk about breaking monopolies, you're essentially talking about generators that used to be referred to as non-traditional market participants. What does that mean? It means entities that don't necessarily have the resources to read through, pages and pages of code, understand, have teams, massive teams that then have hedging strategies and do this and that and the other. They don't have all those resources, and yet you need them to play their part in the market. Now, the only way to actually do that is to make things accessible to them. How do you make them accessible? You make them accessible through key solutions like the Connect platform, which actually provides data in a format that they understand, that they can customize, which essentially almost holds their hand. And then you actually also do that through digitization of these codes, where you don't actually have to know the question you're asking to be able to find the right answer, or the terminology for the question you're asking to find the right answer. If I could essentially just colloquially type in things that I have a question on, I want something back that tells me where I can look for this information. I don't have to pay, I hate to say this, but expensive lawyers to then advise me. This is now going down the wrong track, isn't it?
Cannibalization, it's called.
Yeah, but you almost need that, because if you take a step back from sort of personal interest to actually what the industry needs, and the industry does need information to be available to people that have not really been a part of the traditional industry, to make it available in a format that they understand, and to make it available at a cost they can actually manage. And really there is no alternative, therefore, to digitization. Or digitalization, or availability and transparency of credible data. Because data is available, it's about whether it's credible. And the more real time it is, the more advantageous it is. Because as I said, the grid is balanced on a second-to-second basis. This is not something you can do, an hour after the event. It needs to be done at that time. And if that's the role, if that's where the cost is, then surely better prediction of what's going to happen in a given half hour is critical to bring that cost down and to manage the grid properly. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I don't think this is an option. This is absolutely what must happen. Companies like the one I work for are absolutely playing a role, because software and essentially data is at the front and center of what we're trying to do. And that's exactly what needs to happen. Consumers need to see the benefit of being a part of these systems that actually allow them to engage properly. And that engagement must carry value. At the moment, it doesn't. So if you've got solar panels on your rooftop at the minute, if you're not using the electricity they're producing, unless you've got a battery that's really storing everything, which can then be quite expensive, you're just spilling it over the grid and you're getting minimal pay for it. You're not really being compensated for the service you're providing. And the industry is aware of that. And BSC is aware of that. Elexon's aware of that. They're trying to democratize the process, trying to engage the consumer a bit more. Market-wide half-hourly settlement is an excellent example of that.
Well, let's unpack market-wide half-hour settlements, then talk to us a little bit about this.
Yeah. So this is actually a key change as well, because it's a fight that needs to be fought on multiple levels to, like I said, bring the existing structure that assumes a grid that it's a one-trick pony, and making that do all these wonderful circus-type things, right? One of the battles, obviously, is the data and the reliability of the data and availability and all of that stuff. But the other aspect is actually the settlement function itself. Because as I mentioned, the domestic consumers in the market are actually, their meters are not getting settled on a half-hourly basis. So all of us get assigned a profile class. So it says, so if you have a 3-bedroom house, you're likely to be using blob amount of electricity.
Just a flat line.
Just a flat line, finger in the air kind of thing. And then they try to make it better with data that comes in after you start with a supplier, or you start consuming and there's more availability of data. But that's still ex post facto. Your markets are being settled on a half-hourly basis every half hour. You're nowhere in that picture.
So you're not really passing the benefits in any way.
No, and you're incurring almost all of the cost, because actually the suppliers don't have access to it.
It's a double whammy.
It's a double whammy, exactly that. And which is why this modification was so critical, because what this will allow now to happen is for all of us with smart meters, SMETS 2 meters more particularly, will be settled on a half-hourly basis, which means our suppliers that are already getting our data now on a half-hourly basis can actually settle it on a half-hourly basis. That's critical stuff, I mean, to take the whole story forward and actually allow for consumer engagement. So all of these time of use tariffs that we keep hearing about in industry, those are not really going to be real if we have stupid meters. Pardon me, but that's what we currently have. We've got a smart meter that's currently stupid because it's not really doing what it's meant to do. It's not really stupid. It will be smart enough now, because as you start settling an industry on a half-hourly basis, the smart meter will do what it's been designed to do. And the suppliers can do what they've been wanting to do for a long time, which is to actually bring time of use tariffs to you. I mean, Octopus, for example, they've launched their sort of time of use tariff a while ago, and it's working wonders. People love it, because if I can charge my car actually at night and get paid for it, why
would
not?
I say no?
Well, exactly right. So it's just facilitating things like this. The market is ready. This was a change that was waiting to happen. It's taken a long time because it's shifting so much within industry, within regulation. So it needed a proper think through. But Elexon's done it. I mean, kudos.
And that going through such big changes, which are not just minor changes into data feeds or integration points, but in essence, we're talking about building systems from scratch, dealing with complex trust integration from market participants. Some numbers to throw out there would be useful. I mean, we're building the data integration platform for Elexon, right? And 50 billion messages a year. That's big, right?
Wow.
But Aditi, what would happen to this when some of the other flex items you were talking about come into the fold as well?
I think it'll actually be helped, because primarily at this point in time, smart grids are really more of a reality for, especially in domestic space, for new build projects. And these are projects that you would otherwise just slip under the radar, and you would not actually, the consumers there wouldn't see the benefit of local energy systems, because half-hourly settlements is brilliant, but it's great where you can't have smart grids, because it's the next best thing, in that you've got a set of homes, effectively, be 1,200, 2,500, 100, however many, that actually have the benefit of now speaking to the market in some form. They still don't have the benefit of a community. And when I say community, I mean, if my home is south-facing, and the solar panels on my rooftop, but I'm just one person living in the house, and the solar panels on my rooftop are generating, great amounts of electricity. At the moment, my option is basically to just sell it to the grid through my supplier that might give me offers, but I can't benefit my neighbor out of it, or vice versa, because it's considered grid standard, which means there's no concept of community when you've got an MPAN.
Put it back on the network, take it off the network.
Take it off the network, and you're paying network charges. Look, nothing wrong with that fundamentally, but could we have a better solution? In my eyes, yes. Does it mean that the smart grids are the only solution? The answer is no. There's space for everybody. There's a lot to do at the minute to make the consumer journey, the consumer engagement more pliable, to get them more involved. So we're all really in the same space. We're just doing different things that actually make more sense in different spaces. So for new build homes, smart grids make absolute sense. For retrofit, half-hourly settlement, absolutely yes. And the VLP angle, again, I think that would work beautifully with the smart grids, because essentially we're able, with the help of a battery and our systems, which are really the key part of this equation, to shape loads for self-consumption. But we could also use surplus then to shape to market requirements. I mean, it's a no-brainer if you think about it. So exactly right. So it's not a one or the other. It's everything all at the same time, depending on what the need of or what the opportunity is and what the mix is.
So Aditi, with Ofgem having announced that Elexon has been awarded the Market Flexibility Facilitator role, as an independent, talk to us a little bit about what that really means.
I'm so excited about that, actually, because I think this space has been calling out for Elexon for a while. I've always felt that. They've got the necessary sort of, not just the expertise. I mean, I'm sorry, but just the brain power in Elexon is amazing. I mean, those guys have been, they understand the market inside out. To actually have them, having successfully done the settlements role and then also taken on the mantle for settling for EMR, essentially, for the capacity markets and CFDs. I think it's just a natural next step for them to actually facilitate that role actually in the decentralized market. And Flex, I see Flex as largely being a part of the decentralized market.
So define Flex a little bit. Would that be changing the consumer behavior to switch off their electricity for a period of time or delay the consumption of that electricity for a period of time?
I think the answer is yes to both those questions. Because look, I mean, it's a play between, at the end of the day, you're looking at balancing the grid, as I keep saying. And it's a play between, do you want to reduce generation, which sometimes can come at a cost, especially if it's wind or if it's, one of the other generators like nuclear, for example. It's not very easy to just turn them off and turn them back on again. It's cost attached. Could you, for example, then in those instances actually call on consumers to reduce or increase their demand, or reduce or increase generation, depending on what is the best option at that point in time? So at the moment, because of the generation side being under obligations to do certain things, they're able to do things with generators. They're not really able to do things on the consumer side of the equation. Although big ticket I&C customers often have contracts to be able to do that, and they're called DSR contracts. But it's not as widely kind of done as I think there is potential for us to actually do. So exactly that. It's about turning up demand or turning down demand where it's possible. And the where it's possible is the flex. So for example, if you're an aggregates provider, so like ACC, for example, they would absolutely have the penchant to be able to switch on or off during times where they're not really looking to kind of manufacture a blob amount. So each industry would have its own, and each consumer would have their own appetite for flex. They'd have their own timings for when they might be able to provide a certain service. And there might be other times they're not willing to provide it, and that's perfectly fine. But it's about being able to have visibility of who can do what at which point in time and for how much and for what volume. I think it's critical. And really that's what Flex really is to build flexibility. It's just short for flexibility in the system.
Sure. And Elexon, having been on that journey, having done those digital transformation, those system developments, are best poised to sort of
in my opinion,
that
yes. I
role.
think they're just a natural choice because they understand this market, they understand this space, and they're already doing this role at a central level. In my mind, it just makes sense for them to kind of step in and do that role at a more decentralized level, pulling it all together.
And what challenges do you foresee in them being able to do this?
Oh, I don't know. I think the first thing, if I was still in-house at Elexon, the first thing I think we'd be discussing, no doubt, would be the virus, is to see whether this is something that falls within the gift of Elexon. And I think largely I'd like for them to be able to say, actually, this is not that further forwards from what we are already doing, and especially in this new role, I think it's well within the remit of what they could be doing. Obviously, I haven't been on calls to people within Elexon to say, how do you really feel about this before this podcast? So I'm probably going to get calls afterwards going, what were you thinking? But no, honestly, I think in my opinion, if there was a code manager that I'd kind of strongly position for this, that is strongly positioned for this, I think it would be Elexon.
Okay, and there is some more change coming in with still to be discovered element to it, right? We've seen that the DSI, or the digital spine as it's called now, through a study that was done with Arup and a couple Bath University, it's interesting that study indicates that there is synergies in bringing or building a digital spine with nodes of different data providers, and in this case, Elexon, National Grid,
Yeah.
et cetera, in bringing all of that data together for various reasons, but one, to make this complex but flexible system operate,
Yeah.
to achieve the net zero target, to reduce the cost to consumers. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, and we'd love your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, the spine is, well, let's call it the spine. The spine actually is quite critical for the electricity system of the future. Because as we electrify and we move away from gas, you've got transport. You've got, obviously, your traditional consumers being I&C and your domestic consumers. But you've got so many other industries that are now kind of tagging on and making this complex system bigger. And if you're really going to be up to satisfying the challenge of availability of real-time data, which is credible enough and comprehensive enough that you can actually undertake better predictions and take better positions in the market before gate close, I think you are talking about a bank, a single bank of data with different nodes that's potentially connected to it that make it work. So, I mean, we can debate till kingdom come or what it should be called, but the reality is the functionality of that spine is critical. I think spine is a good name because it creates that picture, which is probably more realistic than a bank, in that it's a journey, it's a whole length that has different connections onto it that are all doing different things, but they're all kind of providing data, and anybody wanting to take a snapshot of different types of data is able to do so. I think it's a really important project. In my view, it's still early doors and still early days. So it's probably, I'm going to put it under the category of concept trial, because I think at the end of it, being somebody that looks at things with a pinch of salt.
When you work in legal, you have to.
Unfortunately, it's hardwired, isn't it? So obviously, I mean, as optimistic as I am, sometimes you've just got to give time for things to play out. And early doors studies often point to the right questions we should be answering rather than answering the questions. So I think even if the data spine throws up key questions that industry really needs to think about, that's a job more than well done, because it's breaking new ground. It's doing something that's never been done before. So yes, I mean, do I think this is going to be the silver bullet that changes everything? No. But is it an absolutely critical step in finding that silver bullet? Yes.
So Aditi, one of the use cases within this study that caught my attention was the vulnerable customer, right? And today a vulnerable customer has to call their supplier and register in 10 separate places to really classify themselves as a vulnerable customer.
Yeah.
And this integrated data sharing model, as we call the spine, would right away take that pressure away. You register once and you register across all the systems.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be wonderful? I mean, look, there's a lot of people of a certain age that have never really had to deal much with technology. And it would be really useful if we could secure their buy-in by making it simple. I mean, I know that folks from my parents' generation really struggle with not being able to speak to people face to face, or just not seeing things. It's all very kind of virtual, and it makes it harder if you have to do that 10 times. I think something that actually allows me to say, this is who I am. This is this is the evidence that you need, that I've provided that. Now please make it happen. And if you wanted to do that manually, it would be incredibly costly. But with a technical solution or a technological solution, I think that might just be what we need to bring a lot of disengaged customers back into the game, because it's just simpler now, and it's reliable, and it's credible, and it takes all the grief away.
And why stop at just energy then? I mean, water bodies, the broader utilities, right? The platform could span.
Absolutely right. I mean, look, we've been living in a silo for a long time within the utilities world in different ways. And there is obviously, the economic regulators have got a forum, and I'm not suggesting that people are not talking to one another. But it's one thing for organizations to talk to one another and quite another for data to talk to other data points. And do we need a comprehensive spine? I think yes, because why would we want to lose that advantage of actually data points being able to call across other data points that actually make a consumer's life easier. Because it's still that one human being, isn't it, at the end of the day that you're trying to service.
Yeah.
So from a residential customer perspective or one entity from a corporate perspective. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think, and the more we embrace digitization, I think the easier these conversations become because it just does that. So you don't have to make it happen anymore. It's there for you to design and do. And I'm very conscious I'm speaking to the CTO of a company, and you probably can tell me more about how you can do these things. But that's just my simple understanding of what's possible. So it just takes a lot less effort to make it future-facing if it's already available in a data form, as opposed to building it from scratch each time as you need it.
Yeah, and because we're talking so much about data and the role that it would play, there is disruption happening in the market, right? With generative AI now coming at the forefront. And to you, who's been a professional lawyer for the best part, what do you see the uptake of generative AI in actually simplifying things like the balancing settlement code or generally regulation and legislation that people have to go through?
So look, I'm going to start on a really optimistic note because that's where I think things need to go. I think AI is something that should help, not hinder. So it should be able to help things. And simplification is definitely a challenge for very complex documentation. So if there's a proposition where AI could come in, step in, and actually simplify things, why not? I mean, I'm not, unfortunately, very sort of tech savvy, but I try to keep up with the game. And just exploring the potential of ChatGPT has blown my mind. Or just Read AI, which is a note-taking tool that Google has. And the quality of the summaries that it produces is quite, impressive. So I'm not going to say it gets everything correct, but that's not the point. The point is the germ of the idea is there. And as I understand it, only gets better the more you use it. So keeping all those things in mind, do I see a future where AI plays a role in even regulation, which is kind of the sacrosanct aspect? I think the answer has to be yes. Is it going to be challenging? Absolutely. I mean, we don't know at the moment what we don't know. And lawyers love this, isn't it? This is the whole part of what we do, is we spot the knot. And it's really hard to spot the knot with stuff you don't properly understand, or the capacities of which you don't properly understand.
Which is still under evolution, right? It's changing every single day.
Exactly right. So in many ways, when you think about looking at bringing in AI into the world of regulation, to me it almost feels like I'm being asked to architect a building as I'm building it. That's a
fascinating idea, though.
That's a hard job.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, just kind of for myself, how much of this is actually an option and how much of this is actually for us in the legal field and the regulatory field to come together and accept the fact that this is going to happen. So is this the case of, well, this is going to happen. Are you going to be able to stay on top of it? Or are you actually going to surrender and say, this is it, I can't cope? And I don't think the latter is an option. I think we have to find a way of learning, of keeping an open mind, and actually accepting reality that this is very much going to be a part of our life going forwards. It's not a question of if and whether we like it and whether we want it. I think it's a question of how do we fold it in? How do we learn enough and fast enough to actually get on top of this? And that really is a square challenge, because it's now challenging the remit of what regulation does, how it functions, the key concerns that we deal with, the key risks that this brings in. Have we even thought of all the risks, or is it just stuff that we can see right now? And what if it kind of goes further forwards without us having any control? So control is a key thing in regulation. And one of the greatest challenges conceptually is losing that control. So yeah, it's an exciting space.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't...
A lot to be discovered.
Indeed, exactly right. And of course other people will have views. But for me, I don't think it's a question of if.
So Aditi, I must ask you this question. What are your top 3 predictions for where the energy markets are headed in the near-term horizon?
I'll give you 4.
Oh, I'll take it.
So yeah, it's actually, these are policy points that have been discussed, in the past as we've moved into this world of renewables and net zero. And it's democratization, digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization.
Love that. 4Ds.
Four
You
Ds.
heard it first on this podcast.
Don't know if I can claim ownership or copyright to that, but yes. So no, absolutely. So look, we've seen a fair amount of all 4Ds actually individually start unpacking. So you've seen democratization brought in through P355, the wider market access modification. You've seen P375 democratize the market even further. P415. There's and that's just in the central markets. You've also got the distribution network operators, starting to take up their distribution system operator role and creating sort of flex markets actually more locally for themselves. Decarbonization, of course, has been on the agenda for ages, and it's only going to gain momentum under this new government, which is brilliant. As we drive towards net zero, carbon markets, carbon capture, we should start seeing a lot of momentum on that. Digitization, you're obviously spearheading a lot of that actually through your engagement with Elexon on not just the Insight solution, but also on the digitization of the BSC. And hopefully other codes will follow suit. So it's all heading in the right direction. And of course, decentralization, which of course happened by virtue of a lot of the generation assets being connected to the distribution level rather than, or networks rather than the transmission networks. And actually, from if I remember this correctly, data suggests that we now have more generation that is actually connected to distribution than at the transmission level, especially with the shutting downs of coal mines. So the story's obviously moved. I mean, we're well on our way on the 4Ds. It's now looking for a single point where it culminates, and I think that is data.
Amazing. I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat, Aditi. It's been brilliant getting all of these insights from you. Would you like to plug something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the truth of the matter is, like I keep saying, there's more than one way of approaching things because it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. But really, we need to start looking at putting generation close to demand. That is place-based power. And yes, that is something that my company, that's essentially a tagline. But the functionality of it is not just being provided by us. There'll be other companies that do it. But this is really where I see the story moving. Consumers should not get penalized, actually, for using assets that they're not fully utilizing. Consumers should be compensated for the services that they're rendering towards local load control. So effectively, if I'm switching off my TV and my usage is not that great between 4 and 7, why am I not being compensated for it? That kind of thing. So it's participation in the market, transparency, and I think a smart grid essentially allows for all those things. It brings it all together in a fashion where really everyone wins. And actually, it's an investable asset class. So you're not doing this at a cost to the market. It's very market friendly.
Excellent. Well, I'd encourage all our viewers to go and follow you on LinkedIn for more insights. It's been a privilege having you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And hope to have you back in 24 months to revalidate the
smart grids. Yes.
Yeah. and hear the war stories of more regulatory changes that have transformed through that. Brilliant.
Hope to be back.
Thank you, Aditi.
Thanks very much for having me.